Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the latest oil and gas and mineral rights news for February of 2025. Justin, it's been a whirlwind start to the year with President Trump's executive orders. Doge is getting involved with cutting waste and spending, and so it's been no shortage of headlines, and that has certainly been the case for energy. And there's been actually some really interesting kind of breaking news here we'll talk about that just came out today actually about the BLM. So interesting developments on the energy front for sure.
Yeah, you said it, Matt. And like you said, just part of the crazy news cycle that we're seeing right now. It seems like stuff's coming out just faster than you can consume it.
Yeah, things are coming out left and right. And to that end, this first article here is about President Trump has nominated Colorado's Kathleen Zgama, the head of Western Energy Alliance and Oil and Gas Trade Group, to run the Bureau of Land Management. So Zgama, Denver resident, has been the head of Western Energy Alliance since 2006, working to protect the interests of oil and gas producers amid international embrace of cleaner energies. So this is an interesting appointment, Justin, because Kathleen Zgama was very outspoken against President Biden's increased regulation and, frankly, not following the requirements to hold leasing sales and things like that. So the Western Energy Alliance was involved in several lawsuits against the former administration to try to unstick those lease sales. And I would say they were somewhat successful to the extent that they got those sales to happen, even though the number of lands that were nominated was well below the average. So it was an anemic lease sale, not a whole lot of land that was available to lease. But so this is interesting. Kathleen spoke at the Colorado Narrow Convention back in, I think it was 2023 maybe, and gave us an update on the federal leasing and federal regulations that were coming down and, what the Western Energy Alliance, their position was on that. So it was interesting to hear her point of view. Now, of course, there's a very polarized take on her nomination, Justin.
Yeah, you said it, man. And as you said, I mean, she has some great experience with the Western Energy Alliance, but it is kind of an interesting pick for Donald Trump. And I think she'll bring some good things, definitely an understanding of the industry. It'll be interesting to see with the lease sales, though. That process has long been accused of being very inefficient. So I wonder if we'll see changes not only in, the amount of leasing they're doing, but maybe the process that they're leasing. She was also challenging rules on increased royalty rates, minimum bids and rental rates, those kinds of things. So it'll be interesting to see how that all kind of levels out, if it just stays at a pre-Biden administration level or if there's radical changes there.
Yeah, I would expect there's going to be some radical changes to the extent that they can make changes to some of those things that they have flexibility in doing. And I think certainly, if nothing else, I think she'll be very proactive in holding those lease sales and doing the things that agency is tasked with doing and managing federal lands. It'll be interesting to see if they try to roll back restrictions on drilling and things like that in areas that have been earmarked for, kind of future protection in that regard, from whether it's recreational perspective or environmental perspective. So no surprise you had. On the other hand, as soon as this came out today, actually, as we were recording, this story broke, that the director for the Western Priorities and Southwest director at the Center for Biological Diversity, two environmentalist NGOs that spoke out very strongly against her nomination. One quote was, "Kathleen Zgama would be an unmitigated disaster for our public lands. She's a fossil fuel industry hack with breathtaking disdain for environmental laws," which, no surprise that they're taking that stance. Kind of anything that Trump has been doing lately has garnered an allergic reaction from progressives. So that's not really a big surprise given Kathleen's background. But I hope that she takes a balanced view of things. I do think there needs to be some reform at the BLM. Over the past 4 years, it really did not do what it was supposed to do in terms of facilitating lease sales, permitting. So yeah, to your point, Justin, if they can streamline the federal permitting process, which I fully expect that she will jump in and roll up her sleeves and try to look at that, that would be a win for mineral and royalty owners, because ultimately, if you have minerals and royalties that are adjacent to federal lands, you're fully dependent on the federal government to lease those federal lands and then to permit wells, because your minerals become part of a federal drilling unit. And so you require the federal approvals to get your minerals drilled, even though they're on private lands, because they're pooled together with those federal minerals. And that's the case in many parts of the Permian in southeast New Mexico, Lee and Eddy County in particular, where there's a kind of a patchwork of federal, state, and private minerals. And so you have this really interesting dynamic there where that's a big focus of a lot of drilling right now. And that could actually be a boost to that area, a further boost if they're able to get more streamlined access to those lands, because it's very economic for them to drill in those areas right now with the prices where they're at. So that could be a win for mineral and royalty owners if there's some improvements to the policies and just the red tape that exists within the federal government.
You said it, man. And we've heard repeated calls from the Trump administration that they want to boost LNG exports. So that it's no surprise that they're kind of taking an all-pronged approach to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, our next one here, Matt, is OPEC. So OPEC didn't make any changes to its existing oil production plans at a review meeting on Monday. President Trump made calls to lower crude prices. And of course, them keeping production the same really wasn't in line with that. Some key members led by Saudi Arabia and Russia maintained plans to keep a lid on crude supplies for the rest of the quarter and then gradually restore output in monthly stages from April, according to a statement. So Matt, they're really trying to just stabilize oil and gas prices. The price where it's at is something that they have been trying to maintain for, what has it been, 2 years now since they've increased production, something like that. So it's been a long road and prices are holding stable. So that is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a quote here in this article that says, despite some doubts, market fundamentals remain strong as indicators of economic growth recovery are showing in several regions. The energy ministry of OPEC member Algeria said in a statement, we expect a greater recovery in demand for oil starting next April after a seasonal slowdown during the first 3 months of the year. So if that holds true, that does make sense, that you want to start boosting production in alignment with an increase in demand so that prices remain stable. So, I think it'll be interesting. The relationship with Russia, you have this whole Ukraine and Russia, potentially talking about coming to the table and striking a deal on ending the war there, which would be great. And I'm sure that Trump doesn't want to rock the boat too much from that standpoint. So I think he's making some gestures and PR statements, but ultimately doesn't want to force any further restrictions on Russia to impact that, because that was a campaign promise of his to try to end that war, as soon as he got elected. So that is, I think, something a lot of people are expecting. Yeah, and I think that, you have, on the other hand, you have the tariffs with Canada and Mexico, which are in play and are going to affect oil prices here in the United States. So it makes sense that he's asking for OPEC to increase production to hopefully decrease prices, because otherwise these tariffs, if they do go into force after this 30-day hold, could cause prices to go up slightly here in the U.S. in terms of the price at the pump. So no surprise that he's asking for them to increase production to hopefully lower prices, because on the other hand, he's making some moves sort of domestically and with our closest trade partners, Mexico and Canada, and putting the pressure on them because of the whole border crisis. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in April as far as OPEC and if they do look to start increasing that. And on the other hand, you wonder what the fundamentals are, Justin, because I think a lot of what we've read in the past is that they talk about wanting to increase production and things like that, but they're really already tapped out. And I wonder if they really have much room to grow.
No, you said it, Matt. But another thing I thought was interesting about this article is they make just a quick mention in the article about the Joint Ministerial Monitoring Committee. In a meeting that they had, they actually changed or replaced some of the members who monitor production. So I thought that was a quick but significant mention. And one of the organizations here I actually recognized, which is ESAI Energy. And they really have been a big part of logical transition in energy and doing a lot of talking about analyzation of when that point might come where, we would see a transition to a different energy source. So it was interesting to see that they changed those monitoring, and it was such a quick mention as well, Matt.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to your point, they removed the U.S. Government Energy Information Administration from that list of those external sources that OPEC Plus uses to monitor member production. So I don't know if that was a little bit of a jab to the U.S. That's sort of an interesting move there because Rystad Energy, I believe, and then U.S. EIA were replaced. So that's an interesting move. That's a good point. I missed that.
Yeah, you said it, Matt. And went from, it looks like they're all private monitoring companies at this point, rather than relying on the U.S. government's EIA, which just a very interesting move, Matt.
All right. What about this last one here? This is interesting. More advancements in the Arkansas lithium boom here.
Yeah. And Matt, this will make a major impact. So there's a $225 million federal grant closed for building an Arkansas lithium plant. So the battery ingredient company Standard Lithium secured an expected $225 million federal grant to build a commercial lithium production facility near Louisville. And Matt, this is a huge move because we had long talked about with lithium that, we may be able to get it out of the ground. However, we can't refine that into a usable product. And this is really the missing building block.
Yeah. And this is part of this grant that we had, I think, covered in a previous news episode. And we'll link to that in the show notes and a few of the others that we've talked about, Arkansas and the lithium activity going on there. But they actually closed it. And I think it's timely, receiving that money when they did, because this was certainly a priority for the previous administration in terms of focusing on clean energy and things like that. And so lithium is a key ingredient for batteries, for electric cars, and for storage. And I do know that Trump has a similar view on wanting to boost domestic production of these ingredients that we rely heavily on China to produce. And so on one hand, we were talking before we hit record, kind of going back and forth, would this have stayed in place under the Trump administration, or is it good that they got this when they did? And I think it could have gone either way. I don't know. I'm still on the fence, like we talked about, Justin. And, it could be that Trump takes even a harder line like he's doing with China and really tries to focus even more efforts on securing domestic sources of lithium, of rare earth minerals, and things like that. I know the whole rare earth mineral thing has been part of the negotiations with Ukraine and getting access to that. So I think that is an interesting development that's happened. And so I think, maybe it could have happened, or maybe there's even more of a bullish, scenario for the Arkansas lithium boom.
You said about it. And there was some huge money being put into this, not only the federal grant, but Standard Lithium, that is, owns 55% of the $1 billion project. And then Equinor, which is Norwegian, is that right? Mm-hmm. From Equinor of Norway, invested $600 million into the project. And they have a 45% stake in the company. And Matt, that's a massive investment. So they're really expecting this to be something that'll be large long-term. And I thought this quote by David Park, the CEO of Standard, was really touching on some major political points. He really worded this carefully. And his quote was, "Closing of the Department of Energy grant is a testament to the caliber of the Southwest Arkansas project." Park said in a statement, "The SWA is one of the highest grade lithium brine projects in North America. And through the use of direct lithium extraction technology, a near-term sustainable opportunity to help secure America's domestic lithium supply chain." And so, Matt, there's some key points in there. I like that he worked in a near term, because that's been a lot of the complaint is, what are we going to do to make this happen in the next 10 years? Sustainable opportunity. It's interesting that he's not specifically calling out the process we're using. And then speaking that this is a domestic source for America, which is, will be a national security issue if it's not now, in the future.
Yeah, and it's certainly something that they're anxious to get this up and running. And it'll be a few years, I'm sure, before this plant is, fully up and running and producing lithium. And so, but, they got to start with the funding. And so that part is done, which is a huge boost to those companies that are part of this project or this consortium. And then the other side of that is, Arkansas still needs to land the lithium rate. So it was denied in November by the Oil and Gas Commission. And so that's really something that we're waiting to hear where they end up on the royalty. So that will unleash the operators to go and drill the lithium wells and then start producing the brine to send to these plants. But in the meantime, I guess they've got time to decide that, because this plant is not going to be up and running for probably a couple of years. It's just in the design phase, I imagine, right now. But the ball's rolling and things are moving in that direction, which is good. And certainly because right now, foreign companies, it's China, Australia, and then Argentina and Chile dominate lithium production globally. And then China is the biggest leader in refinement. And there's a quote here from Robert Reynolds, who's the chairman of the South Arkansas Minerals Association. He says, virtually all lithium processing, whether they're taking hard rock lithium from Australia or brine lithium from Chile and Argentina, processing into lithium carbonate and other lithium products is done in China. So this is a really sort of a national security type issue because we're reliant so much on lithium batteries. At least right now, that's the prevailing technology. And, everything that we use, electronics, from our cell phones to electric cars to really any sort of wireless electronic device, if you have a leaf blower or a lawnmower that has a battery, it's a lithium ion battery. So, we need a source of that stuff domestically. And certainly with a potential trade war with China escalating, it's going to be something we really need to secure. So it's good to see this moving in the right direction.
You said it, man, and a great opportunity for Arkansas as well. It'll bring a lot of jobs over time. All right, Matt. So last but not least, how about the rig count?
Yeah, the rig count is moving in the right direction. It's up the last 2 weeks. I think we're up 10 rigs over the past couple of weeks. So as of February 7th, we are at 570 land rigs as compared to 602 a year ago. So it is creeping up. We had 2 additional rigs in Haynesville and Louisiana. We had a rig added in Texas, Utah, and Wyoming, and then we had 2 drop in Oklahoma. So the activity seems to be moving towards the Eagle Ford and the Haynesville as the 2 benefactors of these 3 additional rigs. And then we had, again, some shifting out of Oklahoma, but, pretty much the status quo everywhere else. You have key highlights here in the DJ Basin. We have 6 rigs running. Eagle Ford, there are 48. Haynesville's up to 30. Marcellus is at 23. So that's talking about Pennsylvania. And then the Permian is at a robust 303. Ohio, Utica is 11. And that's one area I would watch this year. I think there's been a lot of talk about the wells that are coming out of Ohio, really nice looking wells. So that'll be interesting to see if that Utica shale rig count starts to creep up as operators try to direct more capital there. So interesting there. And then North Dakota, last but not least, Williston Basin has got 34 rigs, which is flat from last week. So good to see that that's starting to creep up a little bit. It's pretty stable. Again, I think it's largely going to be dependent on oil prices and what they do this year. And, this whole drill, baby, drill proclamation from President Trump, I don't think is going to come to fruition like some may think. I think it's really the industry is focused on maintaining profitability and spending only the cash flow that they're generating. So unless there's a huge bump in oil prices, I think we'll see this is kind of the status quo. You have a couple of rigs here or there each week, whether it's up or down, but, pretty stable.
You said it, Matt. And, I think we'll see the real testament towards the end of the year because as companies, either have more budget left over, they may start to drill more, or we'll start to see what their plan is for 2026 and what they're going to drill. But, a lot of these large companies, they're working a plan at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. They've already set their capital budgets last year and they're working that plan at this point. Interesting article I've read, I think it was last week, that they talked about what's going on with the Haynesville in particular. And so it's interesting to see that they added 2 rigs because this article was talking about producers were really just waiting until gas prices started to creep up, really waiting on LNG export capacity and those additional expansions at different terminals to start to crank up in order to get prices to go up before they start increasing drilling. So I'm actually kind of surprised to see that they added 2 rigs in the Haynesville. It could be that was already in the plans, I'm sure. And it's not a huge change from week to week. But yeah, it'd be interesting to watch the Haynesville and do we start to see that creeping up now that the LNG export capacity increases on the horizon. I think maybe what we'll see there is those wells get drilled, but maybe not completed. I think they're going to be waiting for higher prices so that they can realize that production at the highest price possible and really needing those projects to come online later this year and into 2026. So yeah, I wouldn't be that surprised if we saw those wells get drilled this year, but not completed until next year. So yeah, that's the other element that we need to be looking at. So yeah, good to see though overall, pretty stable, nothing too crazy. Prices of oil were creeping up a little bit, which is always good as well.
You said it, Matt.
All right. Well, that wraps up this month's news update. So thanks again for listening. And as always, you can find links to the articles we mentioned in the show notes, which can be found at mineralrightspodcast.com.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.